Hello, and welcome to today's Tech Bites, Backup's Dark Secret, the true cost of the 321, and how to be more secure for less with Myota. My name is Kirsten, and today I am joined with Gabriel from Myota. How are you doing today, Gabriel?
Good, Kirsten. Thanks for having me on the show. How are you?
I'm doing great. I always love being, on Tech Bites, talking to our partners and learning more about their solution and how Veeam plus their solution can really offer our customers resiliency, security, and recoverability, right? So, like I mentioned, Gabriel joins us today from Myota. Myota is one of Veeam's technical alliance partners, providing customers with bucket zero storage. Gabriel, there's probably some people today who are joining us who may not know you or are unfamiliar with Myota. Can you introduce yourself a little bit further and talk about what you do at Myota?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Gabe Gumbs, as you mentioned. I am the president and chief hacking officer at Myota. I have, by way of background, been in cybersecurity for some 26 odd years, and most of that time spent as an ethical hacker. And so in my primary duties at Myota, I wear a number of hats, but one of those in particular is in understanding the challenges that we face against our storage infrastructure and backup infrastructure. As it pertains to disasters, whether those disasters are created unintentionally by humans or rather intentionally and maliciously by naughty humans.
Yeah, that makes sense. Disasters happen all the time, and we always have to be prepared for that and have a plan of action when those disasters happen. So today we're going to talk a little bit more about Myota's innovative shard and spread technology and how it can help customers cut storage costs while still maintaining resiliency and strengthening ransomware defense. But, first things first, right? So one of the strategies we talk to our customers here at Veeam when they want to achieve resiliency, maintain data resiliency, is really having, multiple copies of your data. We refer to this as the 32110 backup strategy. So if you're unfamiliar with this strategy or you haven't heard it before, it basically says that you should have 3 copies of data on 2 different media types, one that is off-site and 1 copy that is immutable, air-gapped, or offline with 0 restore errors because you've tested recovery and you know you're able to recover. However, when we think about having multiple copies of data, we have to consider the extra costs that are associated with this. So, Gabriel, with having multiple copies, the dark side is the extra costs, right? So what's causing these costs and the bloat?
It's a great place to start. And so the first place of cost, of course, is, well, you have to store that data somewhere. And the cost of storage overall has trended downwards over the last several decades, right? The amount of storage capacity increases and the price of that cost has decreased. The same is equally true of even cloud storage. We've seen cloud storage also, the cost of that coming down as well, too, and getting a bit more hyper-focused on use cases. The challenge, of course, is, as you highlighted, and much to my lament as a security practitioner, one of the best answers we have to combat ransomware is, well, we need to make multiple copies of our data. And so to your point, you need to have not less than 3 copies of that data. And it gets referred to differently. Most folks will categorize that as a primary, secondary, and an archive backup. Within the context of Veeam, you may have that, you may have your backup infrastructure architected such that you have a performance tier where that primary copy sits, and then some scale out tiers where the secondary and then archive copy sits. But as you make full copies, full duplications of that data for the purpose of having that data, again, it simply adds up. If we did some back of the napkin math and just made up some numbers and said it costs $1 per copy, well, now I'm at $3 for those copies, right? But we're not quite done. Making data immutable adds yet another cost. The cost associated with making data immutable is that you have to make the data unchangeable. That is the necessity for immutability, which means that as you create new versions of the data, right? So you have nightly backups, weekly rollups, et cetera, and those also need to be immutable, you're going to need to create a full extra copy of that. The clearest, most demonstrable way to see this is actually in cloud storage. If you need to make data immutable, right? So like, within Veeam console, you press the immutability button and it's going to enable an object lock and it's going to turn on version control. Those are great controls. And in another talk, we can talk about some of the challenges associated with that. But the cost challenges, well, it adds a full additional copy. But to your point, Kirsten, we also need to keep that data in multiple locations. So whether that data is on premises and you need to have, again, network connections to other physical locations, which all have costs associated with them, or you need to move them from regions A and B, et cetera, in the cloud, there are fees associated with that. And all we're still working with here is still just that first primary copy. That's it, just that primary data. But we've now made 4 additional copies of that data. That also introduces the cost for moving that data around. Again, if you're in a conventional space where you're on premises, that network connection between location A and B isn't $0. You've got to pay for that pipe. In the cloud, the same is true. You're going to pay for API fees. You're going to pay for egress fees. You're going to pay replication fees. You're going to pay fees, unfortunately, in the cloud for everything. One of the real hidden costs in the cloud is, if you've ever looked at your cloud bills, it's that it looks like a phone bill. Even the budget storage providers that are coming in at $6, $7, $8 a terabyte, what you're going to see is that they have tiered pricing for API fees, and that's where you're also going to encounter some additional costs there. And then finally, there's just the labor and time associated with some of the complexities around ensuring that that data is in multiple copies, is in multiple locations. To your point, Kirsten, has been tested, and we know that it is usable when we need it.
Yeah, those are all really great points. And, managing costs is a challenge that organizations face today. Not only do they have this challenge of trying to figure out how they are going to manage costs associated with backup, right? They're also faced with the challenge of ransomware. And according to the Ransomware Trends Report of 2024, 75% of organizations suffered from at least one ransomware attack. Not only that, but research has also shown that 93% of these breaches target backups specifically, right? So, Gabriel, why do you think that is the case? And even if an organization is making multiple copies, does this really help solve the problem?
So the reason why backups are such heavily under attack is a very natural shift in tactics. As the IT community was being further inundated with ransomware as we continue to be today, a very easy answer to ransomware attacking the environment was, well, let's go to the backups and let's restore from there, right? Our systems have been affected. They may have been re-encrypted. Let's go get a copy of that data and let's start over from there. Well, after a few attackers were told to go ahead and not bother waiting for the check to arrive, thanks, we got it from here, guys, we'll just restore our data. Well, the attackers shift their tactics. We actually saw this shift about 5 years ago, around the time when NotPetya as a ransomware crew was really coming on the scene. So we saw that shift in tactics. And so the backups, as per Veeam's own research, 93% of the times they are under attack as part of that ransomware attack. And again, why? Attackers are like water. They will find whatever crease and crevice they can to be successful. And the goal is simply to get you to pay the ransom. And so if that means keeping you offline by also disabling backups, then that is exactly what they're going for. Now, how does keeping multiple copies of that help us? Well, it certainly does help in the event that, well, the bad guys are unable to affect all of them. The challenge is we're centralizing our BCDR operations. At the end of the day, we still need to have a singular location from which we orchestrate all of our backups. We need to do that for a number of reasons. We need to have one system to rule them all, so to speak. We need one place that we can trust the information. We need one place where we can orchestrate all of that across diverse environments. That concentration does increase the risk, however, that as an attacker, if I attack those concentrated points, I'm still able to breach the backups. The other challenge, again, of course, is then there's the cost associated with it. But you have to reapply the same security controls to every copy. You want to encrypt that copy, not just the first copy, but You want to encrypt all the copies. You want to make that data immutable, not just one of them. You probably want to make them all immutable. You want to have at least one offline, but ideally, if you could have all of those copies be out of harm's way, you would certainly take that action. And so while backups are incredibly useful for continuous operations, they were indeed built for recovering from human error and natural disaster. And yes, they facilitate a very important part of this cyber recovery scenario, but they weren't by design designed to withstand someone attacking the infrastructure from that perspective. And so, we see lots of different ways in the real world that in all 93% of those cases, we see the attackers prevailing, escalating privileges, whether it be simply because they were able to steal keys, they were able to navigate into more vulnerable parts of the environment, misconfigurations, a very human thing that happens across very diverse environments. The very act of trying to keep data in multiple locations across multiple types of media means that you have different configuration types, and those all have to line up with each other. Securing data in location A might look different than location B by virtue of them being different types of media, different types of platforms, different cloud environments, etc. Ensuring that data corruptions hasn't been replicated throughout. That's something that Veeam, for example, is absolutely amazing at doing. And so you want to ensure that that continues to proliferate its way out through the environment. These are a lot of the challenges associated with making multiple copies from a security perspective.
Yeah, that all really makes sense to me because, when you mentioned how, backups are really created for more of like the human side of disasters because we all make mistakes, no one's perfect. And I could see that very traditionally, over the years, like a couple, like maybe 50 years ago, that was the case. But it's like almost like the disaster landscape has changed. And now it's almost more common to experience a cyber attack, maybe potentially, right? Than someone just going in and, deleting the backups on accident, or even it's more common for maybe like even a malicious insider to get mad and go in and delete the backups. And really, with the ability to have, immutability, sending those backups to immutable, you're really going to limit those from being deleted for at least that period of time. So it is really wild how, innovative and sophisticated this landscape has changed. And it, like, I'm almost afraid to say, what is it going to look like in 5 years? It's like a kind of a scary thought when you think about even what's happening today. So yeah, Myota has a special technology that you guys use when you store your backup. It's called the shard and spread technology. And it's really been called the intersection of storage and cybersecurity. So I know I'm a little bit unfamiliar with this, but can you tell us some more about this technology and what it does and the use cases for it?
Absolutely. Let's start with that question, that hypothetical question you had of what's it going to look like? What's the landscape going to look like in 5 years? That's where shard and spread begins. As an attacker myself, what Myota did differently than the rest of the community is we looked at this problem not through a defender's eyes, not through the eyes of pure resiliency, but through an attacker's lens. And so we assumed compromise. How do we guarantee the security and recoverability of the data, assuming the environment has been compromised? This is where shard and spread begins. So first, let's talk about what Myota is. Myota, as I mentioned before, is a secure distributed storage environment. It is just that, secure distributed storage environment. And sometimes we get referred to as cyber storage, which is Gartner's way of defining storage that proactively protects itself, basically. And so it's a very simple idea that required amazing execution. And effectively, it makes other IT challenges, such as replication and resiliency that are typically complex, it makes that seamless and transparent to the larger backup and recovery process that Veeam enables their customers to do. So Myota Bucket Zero, this distributed secure storage that uses this patented shard and spread technology, acts as an object storage that connects to Veeam. And I'll show a live demonstration of exactly how that happens. But It's a simple configuration change. The same way you connect any object storage to Veeam, any object ready storage to Veeam, you connect Myota the same way. And it begins with this multi-step process that starts with another future-proofing technology. It starts with a quantum-proof encryption. This zero-knowledge encryption combines a practical encryption mechanism with a quantum-proof encryption mechanism to encrypt the data. Why? Well, think about what happens when you encrypt data. If I come along, I can no longer read that data. But if I come along and re-encrypt that data, well, now you can't read it either. So the first step in our process eliminates these types of re-encryption attacks by chaining together the encryption of the data, the metadata, and the keys themselves, ensuring that there is no singular location or component to the platform that can be attacked and compromised. We then take that encrypted data and we break it into pieces. By default, we break the data into 4 pieces, but hold on to that number. I'll be back to it. It's pretty important. After we've broken that data into 4 little bits of digital sand that is by themselves not usable to anyone. You could steal these little shards. I could hand them all to you. You can inspect them. They're useless to you. We then take them and we distribute them across diverse storage environments. This gets into the put the data in multiple locations component of this. So we take the data and we put it into multiple locations. So now the data is sitting at rest as pieces, encrypted in multiple locations. But there's a few more things actually happening here as part of shard and spread. Those shards are also air gapped away from the object storage environment. What do I mean by that? I mean the shards cannot be accessed directly from the object storage interface. You can do any and all of the normal API requests to that object storage interface as you like. What you cannot do is interact directly with the shards. This is where we built immutability into the platform also. We talked a little bit before about conventional immutability. Write something one time with the ability to read it many times. Well, Myota does the exact same thing. We are writing that data one time to the shards and allowing you to read it many times, but we are passing all changes through to our writing capability. So the immutability is a pass-through immutability, meaning every time the data changes, every time you capture a new version of a backup, every time you roll up from a daily to a nightly to a weekly to a monthly, etc., we capture those changes simply as just the difference between the change. That also keeps the cost down, by the way. So we're not making full duplications of the data as part of our immutability strategy. We're only capturing the change to the data. So when we capture that change to the data, we tuck it away into those shards also that you can't do anything with. They're just shards. So how do you use the data? Well, when you go to restore the data, Veeam goes and it makes its call as it normally does. All it sees is a normal object storage and it makes a call back. And then the Myota controller makes a call and it brings back 2 of those 4 pieces. Remember I said we break it into 4 pieces and that number was important. We call back 2 of those 4 pieces. This is where we build in additional availability into the platform. We do not need all 4 of those parts to reconstruct the data. Those locations could have a failure. They could go offline. It could simply be that it's slow because it's a day that ends in Y, and that given cloud provider that you're using or storage location is having an issue. We only require 2 of those locations to be active. But the system's also self-healing. So if one of those locations did have an issue, similar to a RAID array, you replace that location or it gets automatically spun back up and replaced and it self-heals itself. So V makes a call to retrieve a backup. It pulls back 2 of those 4 shards. It reconstructs them, it decrypts them, and presents the data back to Veeam, allowing you to always continuously operate no matter what happens to that storage environment. It doesn't matter if it were attacked, doesn't matter if it were taken offline. It doesn't matter if the next day you decide you don't want to keep the data in storage location A, well, turn it off. Turn on a new storage location, and just again, like taking out a hard drive and putting a new hard drive in, it will self-heal and redistribute itself across that environment. So some pretty complex ideas, but what we've really done here is we've abstracted away all of the complexity of needing to keep multiple copies, as we now have across 4 locations, in multiple locations, encrypted, air-gapped, and immutable. and reducing the amount of storage needed to keep those multiple copies. We've achieved all of that across one platform with one configuration change to your Veeam environment.
That's some really interesting stuff. So since you're storing, less amount of data, I'm assuming that's really where the storage costs come in. So you'll have less of a cost because you're storing less amount of data. Is that right?
That's absolutely correct. So I brought along a slide to illustrate that as well. And so again, traditionally, you're going to take that primary copy. We're going to use some round numbers here. Let's say that first backup is 10 terabytes. You're going to make a secondary copy of that. Now you are storing 20 terabytes of data. You need 3 copies of that data. So now you're up to 30 terabytes of data, right? We're just chugging along our 3-2-1 rule. You're going to need at least one of those copies to be immutable. So you're going to make that copy immutable. And again, as you iterate through changes, you're going to end up with a minimum of 40 terabytes of data just to be able to maintain a 3-2-1-1-1 rule, which is fine right up until this point, right? Which is to say, we've all been doing that perfectly okay because folks didn't know Myota was a thing. And until we created it, well, it wasn't a thing. But now what Myota's done with the shard and spread process is it takes that same original 10 terabytes of data and not too dissimilar from a RAID process, I break that data up into 4 smaller pieces. There's some parity information included in there. There is all of the immutability information included in there. There is my key shards and metadata all included in there. And now what I have is a total of 20 terabytes of data stored across multiple locations, encrypted and immutable. But as you can see, I'm only using half of the terabytes necessary to still get to that 3-2-1 outcome, slashing that storage bill. So next month, you're not going to end up with this phone bill from your cloud provider going, all right, but I thought I was only paying $6 a terabyte. It turns out I needed 3 copies, so I'm at 18, and then I needed to keep it immutable. Now I'm at 24, and oh, look, there's some API fees. I'm up to $30, $40 a terabyte. That all goes away. With Myota, I like to joke, you pay for what you drink. There's one fee for the amount of data that you protect. Just that original 10 terabytes of data, that's all you pay for. There's no egress fees, there's no API fees. There's no additional fees associated with keeping multiple copies in multiple locations protected.
That's awesome. I know. I hate when I get a bill and I'm shocked. Now you guys say that's what they call bill shock, right? So anyways, so with this approach to the 3-2-1 backup strategy, is this still keeping the backups secure and recoverable?
Absolutely. The backups, as we mentioned, those shards are air-gapped away from the Veeam operating environment. So although Veeam can call onto the object storage environment, what it cannot do is actually call directly into the shard environment. But even if one were to get their hands directly in the shards, again, those shards are encrypted, meaningless shards. And in fact, this might be a good time for us to demonstrate that a little bit. So let's take a look at that to answer your question. Here I have a Myota operating environment. It's connected to a Veeam backup infrastructure, and I'll flip over to the Veeam console so you can see that. But first, let me just pull back one of these shards down here in the storage environment. Let's download that shard file. Let's open it up. It's garbage. There's nothing here that can be deciphered or used. But to Veeam, this data shows up very much as usable data. So what does that look like? Well, again, in order to use Myota with Veeam, we add Myota as part of your backup infrastructure. So for the purpose of today's conversation, I configured a couple of Myota environments. And so here, I'll just go ahead and show you. Let's inspect this one. Look at the properties. It is indeed just an S3 bucket. And like any other S3 bucket, you would configure Veeam with the service point entry, your region, add the credentials, and that's it. You would add that bucket and off you go. So now Veeam is configured to identify Myota as a backup repository. Excellent. From there, we can configure a job to use said backup repository. And so here you can see in this job that I've configured as an example, I have that backup repository set to this Myota storage environment. It's that simple. That data that's sitting in shards, as I just showed a minute ago, is now effectively sitting here within the Veeam environment as a backup infrastructure environment, but you no longer need to go through the complexities of replicating actually a full duplication process that replicates that data out. Myota's intelligent shard replication now takes care of that underneath the hood. So if I were to rerun this job, for example, again, you're just going to see this job run as any other Veeam job normally would. Nothing changes from a Veeam end user perspective. What we've done is made what, again, is a normally complex setup and a very expensive one of keeping that data in multiple locations. We've made it push button easy.
That's awesome. And Myota is a Veeam Ready object storage solution, so it makes it a lot easier for our customers to leverage your solution. Is that correct?
That is correct. We're very proud to be a Veeam Ready solution. In fact, I think we officially announced that jointly today. I think we put that on the wire. So
Oh,
we've been working,
nice.
yeah, we've been working with Veeam customers for a few years, and we've also been working through the process to obtain our Veeam Ready status, and we're very happy to announce that we are a Veeam Ready object storage platform.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was looking at our Veeam Ready program and all the partners in there, and I even looked you up earlier this week, and I saw Myota in there, ready to go, ready to be leveraged, and ready to be used. So you guys you're doing great.
So no, we appreciate it. As we mentioned before, we've been working with a number of Veeam customers prior to that official status. So we're intimately familiar with the Veeam operating environment. We have service provider partners that also they provide joint services of Myota plus Veeam together. Customers can go direct to Myota though for that matter. So you can certainly visit myota.io and get your object storage directly there. And as you saw me configure here in under 2 minutes, configure your Veeam environment to use Myota's Veeam Ready object storage.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you all for joining us. Gabriel, thank you once again for coming on the show. Maybe we can get you back on another show in the future.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I'd love to come back.
Awesome. Well, everybody have a great rest of your day, and we will be talking to you soon.
Yes.